Now I want to move on to what I think was the worst thing he said. And it was a whole bunch of things in one answer. Let me play this real quick.
The thing we haven't talked about, and I'm not going to go on because I want to hear your question, I apologize. We haven't talked about, I remember you and I talking during the campaign, and you had the former guy saying that, well, you know, we're just going to open things up, and that's all we need to do. And we said, no, you got to deal with the disease before you deal with getting the economy going. Well, the fact is that the economy now has to be dealt with. And what is it? Look at all the people. You have over 10 million people unemployed. We need unemployment insurance.
So I'm going to stop and start a couple times. No, we don't need unemployment insurance. Countries that are sane don't do unemployment insurance. They don't dump millions of people on unemployment insurance. You know what the UK is doing? You know what France is doing? You know what Australia is doing? What Canada is doing? And many other countries way, way less wealthy than us. You know what they're doing? Their government is just keeping people on the payroll by covering the payrolls. We print money for war in the United Corporations of America. By the way, did I tell you we live in the United Corporations of America? We print money for war. We print money for tax cuts for the rich. We print money for subsidies to Goldman Sachs, subsidies to Pfizer, subsidies to Raytheon, subsidies to Silicon Valley. So we have plenty of money where the federal government, and it's bipartisan, by the way. Trump could have done this. He didn't. He would have been reelected, by the way, if he did do this. Could have just said, we're just going to pay small business payroll. We're going to cover, big corporations that can't afford it, because not all corporations are Facebook. They could easily do that and not have this economic Hunger Games system, which is unemployment. Because if you get eligible for unemployment, number one, and you know this if you're watching and have suffered, you're not getting unemployment right away. Secondly, unemployment, it keeps, it only stays right now. The deadline is March. Do you think this crisis is going to be over in March? So there's no reason that we have to have unemployment. I'm not saying let's toss it away with nothing else, but everybody could have been kept in their jobs with the government covering the payrolls. We have the money. It's called modern monetary theory. It's a choice. It is a choice not to do it, UBI, whatever you want to call it. It's a choice not to do it. And you want to know why he doesn't want to do it? Talk to his Wall Street donors. They won't let him. That's why. But let's continue on this. Really, he said a lot of things in this answer that were quite illuminating.
40% of the children in America talk about food shortage. 60% of it. Did you ever think you'd see a day in Milwaukee? You'd see in the last 6 months people lining up in their automobiles for an hour or for as far as you could see to get a bag of food? This is the United States of America, for God's sake. We can't deal with that. We promised to look at all the people who are on the verge of being kicked out of their apartments because they cannot afford the rent. What happens when that happens? Everything. Look at all the mom and pop landlords that are in real trouble if we don't subsidize this in the meantime. Look at all the people who are on the verge of missing, and how many people have missed their last 2 mortgage payments and are able to be foreclosed. And that's why I took executive action to say they cannot be foreclosed on in the meantime. Because look at what the impact on the economy would be.
Did you hear what he said? They cannot be foreclosed on in the meantime. They cannot be foreclosed on in the meantime. Let me repeat that for those of you in the back. He's saying, I took executive action so that they can't be foreclosed on now. Am I going to do anything to make sure once the pandemic is over? Am I going to do anything then to make sure they're not foreclosed on? Am I going to do anything after the pandemic is over to make sure that all these people who have not been able to pay their rent for 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, however long you're behind, am I going to do anything to make sure they're not made homeless? Nope. And he could look to his BFF, President Obama, for that. Because Obama, he let millions of people, he let the banks take millions of people's homes through no fault of their own. So he's talking like he's taking bold action by having a temporary foreclosure moratorium, a temporary eviction moratorium. Did Anderson Cooper ask him a follow-up? Mr. President, what happens when the moratorium ends? What happens when the pandemic is over? How are those working class people going to pay $7,000 in back rent? $10,000 in back rent? $15,000 behind in their mortgage? What are you going to do for them? A 50-year payment plan? We know Wall Street wants their money. And oh, by the way, look at what he had to say on student loans.
Loans are crushing my family, friends, and fellow Americans.
Me too.
The American dream is to
kidding.
succeed, but how can we fulfill that dream when debt is many people's only option for a degree? We need student loan forgiveness beyond the potential $10,000 your administration has proposed. We need at least a $50,000 minimum. What will you do to make that happen?
I will not make that happen. It depends on whether or not you go to a private university or public university. It depends on the idea that I say to a community, I'm going to forgive the debt, the billions of dollars of debt for people who have gone to Harvard and Yale and Penn and schools, my children. I went to a great school. I went to a state school. But is that going to be forgiven rather than use that money to provide for early education for young children who come from disadvantaged circumstances? But here's what I think. I think everyone, and I've been proposing this for 4 years, everyone should be able to go to community college for free. For free. That costs $9 billion, and we should pay for it. And the tax policies we have now, we should be able to pay for it. You spend almost that much money as a break for people who own racehorses. And I think any family making under $125,000 whose kids go to a state university they get into, that should be free as well.
So let me get something straight. You can cancel $10,000. That's what he says by executive order. You can't add $40,000 to that. That's no good. $10,000, okay. That is what we call doing what my Wall Street donors will allow me. And let me explain why it's the Wall Street donors. You know how Wall Street owned this house of cards in 2008? They owned all these mortgages. Well, guess what? That were packed together, these mortgages. Well, they also own packed together student loans. A lot of Wall Street banks are heavily in debt and own those student loan debts. You think they're going to allow their employee, Joe Biden, forgive up to $50,000 in student loan debt? By the way, I don't want to poo-poo $50,000 either, but let's just be clear. $50,000 is not the average student loan debt. It's significantly higher. So $50,000, it's a good thing. It would give a little relief. But if you got $150,000, $200,000, are you really sleeping so much better tonight? If you got $50,000, when you still have another $75,000, $100,000 to go? I mean, come on. So, and you see how firmly he responded? No, I will not. No, I will not cancel $50,000 of student loan debt. But I will allow future students to go to a community school for free. But I will allow people making under $125,000 to go for free. That's a good start, but it doesn't help our lost generation of not just millennials, but there are people in their 40s, 50s still with $100,000, $150,000 student loan debt. They cannot live their fullest lives. They cannot take risks, become entrepreneurs, because they're strangled to death economically by the straddle of these student loan debts. Biden could act. If you do the research, plenty of lawyers have said you could cancel all the debt. Snap of your finger. He won't do it because Wall Street won't let him. Now, let's continue on with this answer, because he said something that I thought was just bonkers.
Talk about food shortage. 60% of it. Did you ever think you'd see a day in Milwaukee? You'd see in the last 6 months people lining up in their automobiles for an hour or for as far as you could see to get a bag of food? I mean, this is the United States of America, for God's sake. We can't deal with that. We promised, look at all the people who are on the verge of being kicked out of their apartments because they cannot afford the rent. What happens when that happens? Everything. Look at all the mom and pop landlords that are in real trouble if we don't subsidize this in the meantime. Look at all the people who are on the verge of missing, and how many people have missed their last 2 mortgage payments and are able to be foreclosed on. That's why I took executive action to say they cannot be foreclosed on in the meantime. Because look at what the impact on the economy would be. You think it's bad now, let all that happen. Look at all the people who have lost their insurance. How many, I'm not asking for show of hands, how many of you had jobs with corporations or companies that provided health care, the COBRA health care? Well, guess what? The company goes under, and guess what? You lose your health insurance. Well, we should be making sure you're able to pay for that so that we keep people moving.
If you understood that jumbled mess, he literally just stated something that was obviously bad. He just said, you know, think about all the employees that lost their health insurance because their health care came from their jobs. Literally an advertisement for why you shouldn't have health care tied to employment. He literally just said it without even realizing it. Look at all these people. Millions of people have lost their health care because they had it from their jobs. But then in the same statement says, I don't know, he must have had a brain fart because obviously there's some issues there with his brain. He says, you know, COBRA health insurance, you know, we got to help them pay for that. Why? Why do you have to help them pay for that? Why should they pay for that at all? Anderson Cooper didn't ask him. Hope you enjoyed that last video. Hop on over to statuscoup.com where you can sign up for our email list and become a member for as low as $5 to $10 a month. Membership is how we grow. That's statuscoup.com/join. And remember, join our email list so we can grow the revolution with you.